Okay, so unfortunately I lost my previous world. But anyway, so one concept that I believe we've all suffered with is this idea of setting time limits on video games, especially video games, on all kinds of leisure activities in general, but video games particularly. Your parents put a particular amount of time, a particular limit on how much time you're allowed to spend, for example, playing video games. Because, for example, they see that you spend all day playing Minecraft and they're not happy with that, and they don't want you to spend all day playing Minecraft. They want you to do other things, whether it's homework or anything else, really, or go outside, I don't know. But the idea basically is that they don't want you to just play video games, or at least they don't want you to play video games for too long, or for what they consider to be too long. Of course, this in itself is understandable. It's natural to believe and to, of course, assume that there is always too much of anything. Video games are no exception. In fact, it's and of course, as frustrating as it has to be accepted that it is true. We may, of course, not like it, but, video games can be bad for us in excess, just like anything else. And so when our parents set a time limit for how much we were allowed to play them, it's because they're trying to help us, and it's because they want what's best for us. And so for them, what's best for us includes, well, not playing video games for like 15 hours a day, really. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every objection that your parents have against video games is well-founded. Of course, there is a lot of memes that go around on the internet about how people believe that video games are like bad for you because, for example, they change your mentality, they make you more violent and things like that. Of course, it's not entirely sure whether that's true or not. Of course, it is, of course, understandable. Why did I say of course like 3 times there? It is understandable to assume that a video game, for example, which consists of you shooting people all the time, would make you more prone to be accepting of violence. And not only are they justified in believing that, we still don't know if they're right or not. Of course, we as people who actually play these games and things like that, we may be, I suppose, biased in our thinking. We may want to simply deny it, whether it's our parents or other people. We are very tempted to say that they're biased, that they don't really know what they're talking about, that there's no scientific proof to, well, prove that video games do make you more violent. While that is true, there is also another aspect, which is, if, again, it is a logical assumption to make. If you are someone who doesn't really know anything about video games, except that, all you see is your child spending hours upon hours on it every single day, at least maybe not every single day, but as often as they can, it will be natural to assume, it will be natural to be afraid of any repercussions that this may have on your child's well-being, whether it's their physical or mental well-being. And at the same time, it's important to remember that we ourselves are biased in a way as well. You, as a person who really enjoys these video games, you are natural to get defensive about them when someone says that you shouldn't be able to play them because they have a bad effect on you. And so, yes, of course, people who say that video games are that make you more violent and all that without necessarily having proof to back it up, yes, they are biased. But you, dear viewer, dear person who plays these things and don't want to be prevented by your parents from playing them, are just as biased, and in fact, maybe even more so. My point is this: when our parents set limits for our video games, for example, how much time you can play video games and all that, they're doing it because they're looking out for you. Maybe you don't necessarily like it or don't appreciate it, but you have to accept it. What is this? I get an abandoned port, like an unfinished portal as well. That's really good. That's a really lucky spawn. I didn't even put a seed. This is just a random spawn. So, for example, if you spend too long just hunched while playing like your PlayStation or something, then it's natural for your parents to see this. That they see you like spend like 5 hours straight not moving at all, and so they get worried. They say, well, is this good for my child? I definitely don't think it is. It definitely shouldn't be. I definitely wouldn't expect it to be good for them to sit still for 5 hours straight doing nothing but push buttons and react and, play a game where they're like killing people or something. I don't know if you're playing Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty or whatever. And not only is it understandable, but it is good for you. Yes, of course, even you as a person who enjoys these things must begrudgingly accept that it definitely isn't good for you to spend 5 hours doing nothing but push buttons on a controller. And so, well, yes, it is sad, but it's true, and it's undeniable. Another aspect is productivity, and the idea that if you spend too much time on something like video games, you will not really be doing anything else. And so you, for example, might not do your homework, you might not really, I don't know, like do your chores, do whatever, a lot of things. Of course, this brings us to the idea of addiction. Are video games truly addictive or not? Again, we can't really say for sure that they're not. We can't really say for sure that they are, but we can't really say, even though actually it has been said by some very competent authorities that it's very likely that they are, or at least that they can be. But of course, even if they're wrong, that doesn't mean that we can say for absolute certain that they're not. At the end of the day, it's very likely that they are, because the idea is that at the end of the day, yes, video games do have this element of making us want to spend hours upon hours doing the same activity and going back to it time and time again. And I don't know about you, but that does sound like an addiction to me. Again, I don't have the authority or the competence to be able to say for sure that this is true, but it's possible, and it's very possible. Unfortunate, yes, but possible, absolutely. And so the danger is that when you're faced with something like this that can eat up hours and hours of your day, and days upon days of your month, and months upon of your years, then what you're left with is a very likely possibility that you will sacrifice certain aspects of your life that shouldn't be sacrificed. Whether, for example, these aspects are school, or for example, other activities that you may be doing. All of this can be a danger, and your parents, when they see this, they feel that this danger can be very high. For example, growing up, I was a pretty good student at school. I always did my homework. I never really I always did pretty well on my exams for the most part. So I was considered a pretty good student. But of course, I had limits placed on my video game time. My mother definitely didn't allow me to play video games for as long as I would have wanted to as a kid. And so of course I, for example, might have been tempted at times, and in fact I was tempted at times to think, well, hang on, if I do all my homework and always do everything that I'm supposed to be doing, so video games don't really get in the way of my productivity, do they? And the idea is, if the point of placing limits on video game time is to make sure that productivity is not impacted, then what's the point of placing limits if I am productive? But then you also have to accept that, well, hang on a minute. What if, at the end of the day, I am productive because of these limits? Because my mother placed limits on how long I can play video games, it's because of that that I always do my homework, that I always study for my exams, that I always get decent results. If she didn't put such limits, maybe I wouldn't have been so successful. So that's really the issue. And of course, even as a kid, I was, of course, sometimes frustrated by some of the limits that my mother placed, but I also had to accept that they were logical. That's basically the idea. You have to always understand that your parents, because they want what's best for you, for them, wanting what's best for you means not just accepting that you need to eat, sleep, and I guess, just your essential needs. No, it also includes things like doing well in school, and, well, among other things, of course. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here is the concept of productivity. If you're productive, then that means, for example, you do your homework, you get good results at school, you, for example, get a good, I don't know, piano practice if, for example, your parents want you to play piano and you enjoy piano, but for example, if you play too much video games, it would interfere, at least that's how they see it. And of course, it's important to remember that as kids, we don't necessarily have a lot of restraint. And what this means is that we do actually need an external source, someone else, to really limit us in this way. And that's where our parents come in, because they want to take care of us, they want what's best for us, and therefore they place these limits, even if we don't necessarily like it. At the end of the day, not everything that's good for you is something that you will like, or that you will enjoy, or that in the moment you will see as necessary, even if, with the benefit of hindsight, you will realize that, in fact, it actually was. Now, of course, I'm not denying that some parents place excessive limits. Some limits can indeed be excessive, undeniably. For example, I had a friend when I was little. He told me that his limits were basically his mother allowed him to play 10 minutes per day. So every day he's allowed to have 10 minutes to play video games, and that's it. That's literally all he's allowed all day. Now, of course, that sounds terrible. It's just very, very restricting and very, very small. You can't really do much with 10 minutes a day. I mean, what are you gonna do? And so, for example, something like that is pretty much equivalent to not allowing him to play video games at all. Because, I mean, if you're gonna play 10 minutes a day, what are you gonna do with 10 minutes a day? So, in that situation, for example, just straight up not allowing him to play video games might have been more merciful, really, because, I mean, just 10 minutes a day is tantalizing. It's extremely annoying, and so yes, in that instance, it's a little too little. So if you're a parent and your child plays video games a lot, you do have to balance this. You have to understand, of course, that video games, at the end of the day, children, they need their game time. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of setting limits, but making sure the limits aren't excessive. Just like anything, really. You can't really expect anything to work if it's too little or too much. And so it's a question of how far those limits should go. Should you limit it completely? Should you prohibit it completely? Maybe not go so far. At the end of the day, video games nowadays have not just become a solo activity, they've become a social activity. So certain aspects that parents um, didn't like about video games, such as, for example, the idea that, it's best for you to go outside and play with your friends. Nowadays, you can play with your friends. You can literally just go online and just play the game online with your friends. That's definitely so. Video games do have a social aspect nowadays. Of course, that's just an example, but it's the idea itself that a lot of the objections that people have against video games aren't necessarily well founded. And so, if you're a parent, you have to accept that uh, some of the views, some of the preconceptions you may have about video games, how they work, and what they do might not necessarily be correct. But at the same time, you as a child, or at least as a son or daughter of someone who believes that video games should be limited and who does limit your access to video games, need to also understand your parents' perspective, which is that they are looking out for you, that they believe that it's not necessarily very good for you to spend copious amounts of time on something that they believe isn't really helping you very much in your life. Whether they're wrong or not, you have to see their point of view, and their point of view is my child spends hours upon hours on their computer or on their PlayStation, and it's concerning. So, like pretty much everything in life, it's a question of balance. It's a question of finding the right balance and finding the right, let's say, compromise. Because everything in life is a compromise. So if you're a parent watching this, and next time your kids complain that the limits you're placing on them are too restrictive and that it's not really fair, of course you are free to simply ignore them because sometimes they may simply not be being objective, and at the end of the day, it's natural that you're not being objective in a situation like that. But at the same time, also consider whether perhaps they don't have a point, whether perhaps you're not being a little too restrictive, and whether, in fact, you should be a little more lenient with them in that aspect. But yeah, of course, you should remember this if you're a kid watching this and one day you become a parent yourself. Just remember how you felt, but at the same time, understand how your parents felt, and you will, of course, understand how they felt once you actually become a parent yourself. And so, well, yeah, that's really all there is to say. Remember how you felt, but of course, that doesn't mean that you should act in the way that you would have liked your parents to act when you were at that age. Wow, terrible deals, as expected. But yeah, I hope you found this understandable, that you found it logical, that it made sense, and that maybe you even found it informative in some way. And well, yeah, I don't know. I suppose I'll see you next time. Are you still watching?